the late 1970s into the 1980s, the world was gripped by the tensions of the Cold War, particularly Europe and especially Germany. East and West stood divided by not only ideology, but a physical wall in Berlin. A whole generation thought not if, but when the bomb would drop. Song reference there. And many thought it was inevitable that Warsaw-packed tanks and troops would stroll across the Fulda Gap. The 80s were a very tense time. While all these geopolitics and world superpowers were struggling, in West Germany, Mercedes-Benz was quietly engineering a masterpiece. One that would transcend the Cold War, politics, and time. The Mercedes-Benz W126 was born from an era that demanded both innovation and uncompromising excellence. That's the best way to describe Mercedes-Benz of that era. Launched in 1979, the flagship sedan became a symbol of German precision, German perfection, confidence, during one of the most uncertain times in history. There's lots of cars in Mercedes history to think back on, but the reputation that Mercedes is still holding on to this day was built and cemented with the W126. I want to talk about and explore a little of the history and innovations that the W126 brought from Mercedes and what I, in my personal opinion, consider the greatest Mercedes-Benz ever built. In fact, I owned one. We'll talk a little bit more about that. In late 1972, Mercedes-Benz introduced the W116, technically what would be considered the first S-Class. It was a stylistic change over the W109. With a more square, tank-like, almost brutalist design, it cemented what would be Mercedes' design language for the S-Class sedan, moving forward almost 3 decades later. But just a year after the launch of the W116 S-Class, Mercedes engineers were already back at work. They launched what was internally known as Project W126. Their goals were to continually improve ride quality, sharpen the handling, enhance safety, and with the current oil crisis happening, the next S-Class had to be more efficient. Headed by legendary designer Bruno Sacco, the W126 would take the squared-off, tank-like looks of the W116 and refine them, make them a little more aerodynamic, and hone every aspect of design through extensive wind tunnel testing. Even the small details mattered a lot. The wipers were tucked beneath the hood to improve airflow. Body lines were smoothed while still keeping that squared tank look. This was also an engineering leap because Mercedes looked at the overall design and used lighter materials throughout the structure and engines, resulting in better efficiency without compromising safety and structure. When the W126 debuted at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1979, it was a subtle yet massive leap forward for the S-Class, understated, elegant, over-engineered, and built with obsessive precision. There were so many different variants. I'm not going to go through and list them all here. You had long wheelbase sedans, you had various engine options, inline 6 all the way up towards the late 80s with the 5.6. Technically, I think it was a 5.5 liter V8 engine. And thrown in the mix of all this was probably my favorite Mercedes of all time, and it started as the 500 SEC. Again, these were not just sedans. There was a ultra-luxury top-of-the-line coupe. The 500 SEC, it was pillarless, beautifully proportioned. It was the grand touring flagship. I think it's one of the most beautiful coupes Mercedes ever built. Throughout the 80s, Mercedes continued refining small tweaks on the W126. As I mentioned earlier, there was an improved 5.6-liter engine. They offered revised, larger wheels that those 14-inch wheels were getting a little small for the time, and they still look goofy to me to this day. By the end of the 1980s, the W126 Mercedes had grown with a reputation of a car in the greed is good era that executives drove, diplomats, dictators for that matter, heads of state. It was really the car that defined what we think of now when we think of Mercedes and we think of S-Class. At think the best way to start out the innovation section for the Mercedes W126 is a famous line by Jeremy Clarkson from Top Gear, where he stated that if you want to know what's going to be standard on pretty much every car in 10 years, look at the current Mercedes S-Class. And I think that really held true for a long time. And again, I'm going to reference that I think it's all started with this car. I already talked about some of the refinements of the W116, the lighter materials, better economy, better wind efficiency, all that stuff. But there was quite a few things on the W126. While they might not be the first of their kind, it was the first mass adaptation of said features that later became standard on every car we drive today. The first thing with the W126 was the 4-speed automatic transmission. It was groundbreaking for the time. It would monitor throttle input and terrain to optimize shifting behavior. It could limit acceleration on downhill grades. I mean, again, in the 80s, this was happening. It would maintain position on steep inclines without brake input and even operate in a reduced function limp home mode, which we all know is pretty standard on every car nowadays, in case there was a system failure. Safety. Obviously, Mercedes-Benz has always been about safety, and the W126 development took earlier Mercedes safety developments and refined them and pushed them further than they had been before. It refined the anti-lock braking system, which became increasingly standard across the range of its production. The 126 introduced passive safety stuff, which again is all standard today. And it became an industry benchmark. Driver airbags were introduced in the early 1980s, followed by passenger airbags later that decade. And I think, don't quote me on this, I think it was the first production vehicle to ever have dual airbags. Now, I think the original airbag was developed, I think Oldsmobile back in the early 70s. So it's not an original Mercedes innovation, but they really took the technology and moved it to where we are today. Seatbelt pre-tensioners engineered to tighten it automatically in emergency situations. Again, standard on every car today. And crumple zones, absorbing, dissipating impact forces. The 126 was an incredibly safe car for the time, and I still think it's safe today. They were also one of the first manufacturers to implement traction control. It was an acceleration slip regulation system. Now, I don't know how reliable those are nowadays, but again, for the time, this was all groundbreaking stuff. They did have a hydro-pneumatic self-leveling suspension, and I don't know particularly what model that was on. Maybe that never made it to the US. Maybe that was in Europe, but again, all innovative stuff that is standard place today. The interior. Let's talk about the interior. Now, the interior didn't change that much from the W116 car. This was, again, a time when luxury was quality of materials and build quality. These cars are notorious for the bank vault feel when you shut the door. It is airtight. It thumps with authority. Nowadays, luxury is LED lights and screens, and I despise it. Back then, the quality of the leather was impeccable. Now, they did have kind of a springy wagon trail type seat, but again, that was just the way they were designed at the time. But there was other innovations, fully automatic climate control, and it used interior sensors to maintain a constant cabin temperature. This was all groundbreaking stuff in the early 80s. The big springy seats had multiple power adjustments, memory seating buttons. Some of them had heated seats, which was pretty innovative at the time. In the long wheelbase model, rear passengers had an electronic reclining rear seat and heated rear seats, which crazy for the time. Adjustable headrests. It was really something special for the 80s. I'll summarize this by saying Mercedes might not have originated these ideas on the W126, but they took these advancements, refined them, made them viable in a mass production vehicle, and made them standard on everything we drive today. And if there's anything I missed, guys, please leave me a comment below. I'm sure there's something I missed. I'm trying to do my best research here, but the W126, there's just so much about this car. So again, if I missed something, leave me a comment. All right, now we're going to get into my personal experience in owning one of these cars. I purchased a 1989 420 SEL, and it was it was an experience that I still think about to this day. It was an odd time in my life. I was in between car leases, back when you could actually lease a car for relatively cheap money. Those days are long gone now. The one I purchased had high mileage, and it certainly wasn't perfect. The paint showed its age in places. The interior was surprisingly well kept, and it was very nice. The air condition worked exactly as it should, and it's something you definitely don't take for granted when you live in South Florida, as I do. That said, it definitely had its quirks. Mine struggled with a high, inconsistent idle, and I still don't know if that was vacuum issues. I think it boiled down to the Bosch mechanical fuel injection system likely needed to be rebuilt. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when we get into buying one today. The previous owner had fitted these 2000s E-Class 5-spoke looking wheels. You'll see them in the pictures here. They looked really good visually, I think, but the wheel adapters were funky on them, and the car never quite rode as smoothly as I think it should have, so that was kind of a detractor. But even with those flaws, I absolutely love the car. It was dependable, even with the rough idle, and sometimes you would get a fuel smell. Again, I think it was the fuel distributor. It never once left me stranded, and I drove it daily without hesitation. I really did. More than that, it had presence. Wherever I went, and I'm not exaggerating this, people noticed it. I got compliments all the time. And there was always that sense that you were driving something really special. And you'd get the old guy at the gas station. Oh, I had one of those in the 90s and it was the best car I ever owned. I should have never sold it. It was just a really, really fun ownership experience. The caveat to that being maintenance costs. But I want to word this right. Not that it's expensive like some Bentley or something, and parts are available. It's in a unique spot where the people that used to work on these cars and know how to maintain them properly are unfortunately retiring or passing away. So finding a competent tech that knows these cars is getting harder. And again, I'm going to get in that in our final section coming up in a second when I talk about current values and buying one and owning one today. All right, let's get into the fun stuff here. Let's get into what the current market is on these cars, and also about reality of ownership of what is now, in some cases, a 44, 5-plus-year-old car. Just going off Bring a Trailer, which is kind of a good litmus test for current realistic market on these cars. Mercedes sold a ton of these, so there is lots of options, and there's variables on what will make a car way more valuable than another. Obviously, mileage, condition, paint, all the same things that apply to basically any type of classic car. But the really big variables here I'm seeing is mileage. You're going to pay huge money for a really low mile example of one of these cars, both the SEL and the SEC. And a lot of that is because most of these cars have crazy high mileage. Mercedes over-engineered, overbuilt this car to last a lifetime. And people that bought them, these were very expensive when they were new. Mercedes designed this car as an heirloom car. The coupes, as I'm going to put up on the screen here, the SEC cars, usually always demand a much higher price than the SEL. A little more rare, a little more desirable. It was the top of the line Mercedes for that era. You know, you also have to watch the gray market cars, and that was kind of an interesting time in history too. When they launched the 126, Mercedes was only sending over the 3.8 liter V8 cars because they were trying to get around the gas guzzler penalty that was happening in the late 70s, early 80s. So what people were doing, and actually my stepfather did this back in the 80s, with the way the Deutschmark was and the exchange rate, people were actually purchasing cars in Germany and then paying to get them into the United States and reselling them as a quote unquote gray market car. Mercedes, I think, lobbied to Congress to try and eliminate this, but the whole reason was we were only getting that wimpy 3.8 liter V8 that was underpowered. Even in the 80s, it was very underpowered. So Mercedes introduced the 500 SEL SEC to kind of counteract the gray market cars in 1984. And then by the late 80s, they had the 5.6 and things had changed and it kind of killed off the gray market segment. Owning and maintaining a 126 today. How do I put this? I mean, this car represents one of Mercedes-Benz greatest achievements. It was over-engineered. It was built with a level of durability you just don't see anymore today. Well, I'd argue maybe the 5th gen Toyota 4Runner, but that's another video. But like all things, Father Time has changed this equation a little bit. The 126 is an old car. It's aging. And no matter how well built and overbuilt it is, all those little plastic components and rubber hoses and so on and so forth are like I said, 35, 45 years old now. For those of you out there that are mechanically inclined and willing to work on the car themselves, this is a great car for that because it's very straightforward. It's easy to access things. It's a very mechanical car. We hadn't made this full switch to like OBD2 and all digital stuff, but a lot of those old relays and components that age over time just from sure usage are starting to go. I don't think parts availability is bad. I think you can get the parts. If you're getting real stuff, real Bosch parts, real stuff made by Mercedes-Benz, it's going to be expensive. The big one is some of the specialized engineering systems of that day, like the Bosch mechanical fuel injection, fuel distribution system. It's very fascinating, the engineering behind it. But that is a known pain point, one of which I had on my own. And I think they're well over $1,000 to do a core exchange to get a rebuilt one. And you have to know how to set them up right. And as I mentioned before, sadly, the day and age we live in today, a lot of the old true mechanics, and I put that in air quotes, are retired, passing away. Nowadays, everything is set up to you plug a scanner in, the scanner tells you what's wrong, and you replace a part. So I would say for the right owner and the right car, I would not be scared to own one. Jumping back just for a second, prices, a rougher car with very high mileage, you can pick them up $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. And again, if you're a tinkerer and you're someone that wants a project and you know how to work on stuff yourself and you can deal with some cosmetic stuff and 250,000 miles, because the mileage doesn't scare me. These drivetrains are bulletproof. It's all the other stuff around it that would scare me. You can get a deal. Now, pristine, babied, low mileage examples, 20, 30, 40, 50 plus $1,000 if it's an SEC particularly. And then you get into the one-offs, the AMG body kits and stuff, which were rare at the time. And that's another segment all to its own. Some of them have gone for hundreds of thousands. So I'm not even going to include those in this. But, I would say the target price, you could find a nice one with maybe 100, 150,000 miles in that range. It's very well kept with good service records, no paint issues, no rust, which I don't think rust was a big deal because the aluminum, the doors and the hood on the body were aluminum, if I'm correct. $10,000 to $12,000, I wouldn't be scared to own one again. In summary, it's a masterpiece for Mercedes. It was a defining moment for them in this era. There's a lot more detail and stuff I could have got into. I'm going to call this a quote-unquote mini documentary. But it's just always been one of my favorite cars. And I just wanted to kind of geek out about it a little bit. Lay it out in video form. And I hope you guys enjoy this. If I missed anything, or if there's anything overlooked or screwed up, hey, please leave me a comment. I appreciate everyone's support so much. And if you would, I'm going to ask for one like and subscribe beg. Throw me a like, throw me a subscribe, throw me a comment. If you guys like this format, I'd like to do more of these type of videos because I could ramble about 70 different types of cars like this on and on. It's a lot of research to find, the royalty-free images, and thankfully I had a few of my own car and doing all the research and putting this together and writing the script, etc. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you real soon.